Welcome to our fifth week of digging deeper into understanding leadership from the perspective of faith. We've explored that from the perspective of faith, leadership is experienced in one who seeks to serve rather than to be served. And leadership from the perspective of faith is composed of a series of choices on the good road of servanthood. Last week, we examined the choice to have one foot in the here and now and the other foot in the future. And Robert Greenleaf, the author of Servant Leadership, called this characteristic foresight, walking the good road of servanthood for the common good rather than making choices to serve oneself. You see, serving oneself often is serving the common evil of having one foot in the past and the other foot in the present, being clear what one is running from rather than what one is running toward. That's foresight, according to Greenleaf. But this week we're taking a look at another characteristic that Greenleaf observed in servants. That is the characteristic of persuasion. Now, this is interesting because persuasion is a commitment to convince others to walk the road of the common good rather than coercing others to change their ways. Well, let me repeat. Persuasion is a commitment to convince others to walk the road of the common good rather than coercing others to change their ways. Since being exposed to the study of servant leadership 50 years ago, I've been impressed with those whose lifestyle is one of persuasion. One of my discoveries was when I was in Africa and experienced persons taking the vow of membership in the United Methodist Church. In my career, I'd asked the question hundreds of times, will you support the church with your prayers, presence, gifts, and service? But in Africa, something was added. And the word that was added, and witness. In Zimbabwe, I visited a growing, vibrant, serving local church. I heard the story of the first Sunday with their new pastor several months before I was there. At the end of the service, the pastor challenged those who were there to remain in place until they had identified one person they would visit during the next week and with whom they would share their experience on that Sunday morning and their experience of faith. No one left quickly. Some pondered and thought as the pastor offered encouraging suggestions concerning sharing their story in a convincing manner. Rather than being judgmental, rather than trying to attempt to coerce another, finally everyone left. The seeds had been planted every Sunday. The service ended not with a benediction, but with a sending forth to serve by witnessing. Now, you see, a lot of us want to remain silent with our faith. A lot of us want to ignore the experience of wrongdoing and just go our own way. But not in Africa. You see, service in Africa never neglects the opportunity to witness. But how we witness is what separates servanthood. Witnessing with coercion and judgment is self-serving leadership, often seeking obedience. But witnessing with persuasion, no judgment, no coercion, just telling one story in a convincing manner, that's what it means to serve. In my visit to Africa, I saw faithful people challenged to, in Greenleaf's term, to be persuasive in how they witnessed. I told this story to a group of laity when I returned. One in that group was a delegate to General Conference, and lo and behold, at General Conference, in a petition that he put together, the vow of membership in the United Methodist Church was added the word witness. Now, Greenleaf's story of being persuasive was a man by the name of John Woolman, Quaker layperson in the 18th century, who became convinced as a landowner that slavery was morally wrong. It was legal, but morally wrong. It was the road of common evil rather than the road of common good. For 30 years, until his death at the age of 52, he walked and rode horseback, meeting with other Quaker landowners, persuading them to consider the immoral foundation of slavery. And Greenleaf shared in his book on servant leadership that Woolman did not coerce, he did not censure slaveholders. Quote, rather, the burden of his approach was to raise questions. What does the owning of slaves do to you as a moral person? What kind of institution are you binding over to your children? By 1770, 100 years before the Civil War, no Quaker landowners held slaves. The Society of Quakers were the first religious group in America to denounce and forbid slavery among its members. Greenleaf raises an interesting question. Again, quote, what would have been the result if there had been 50 John Woolmans? Greenleaf writes, again, quote, leadership by persuasion has the virtue of change by convincement rather than coercion. Again, servants are not called to be silent. Servants are not called to ignore what is wrong. Servants are not called to be coercive or censor another. Servants are called to be persuasive. Now, this sentence brings us to consider the life and teachings of Jesus. Jesus' preferred and common approach was to convince, not coerce. You see, from the perspective of faith, leadership is experienced when persons follow those who choose to follow the common good. Coercion depends on obedience. Persuasion depends on persons being convinced that the common good is best served by choosing right, what is best for all, what is moral, the common good, rather than choosing wrong, what is best for oneself or for a chosen few. That's the common evil over against the common good. And the way to raise the possibility of the common good as a road to travel, not through coercion, not asking for obedience, but telling one's own story in a convincing manner. Self-serving leaders wear crowns, get elected often, wrap the gavel of power, have offices and furniture of prestige. Servant leaders always lend the helping hand, which often includes persuasion, encouraging others to choose to travel the road for the common good. Persuasion is a characteristic of serving. For your thought and conversation, what are your personal experiences of being persuaded to make choices for the common good? Secondly, what are your illustrations other than slavery of a common evil being adhered to because it is legal even when it is immoral? Finally, who, in your opinion, are the John Woolmans of today who are committed to the art of persuasion rather than coercion? Thank you for listening.